as a country. This is about us only having 300 million people in the United States, many of them poor, many of them live in your community, my community, Congressman Meek, Congressman Murphy, our communities. And what we're saying is if we want these kids to be able to compete against 1.3 billion people in China, 1.2 billion people in India, you're not even going to get on the field unless you're healthy. And we're saying that this is a modest investment. This is $35 billion over 5 years. This is 41 days in Iraq. Now, when you think of it that way, and this has been the contrast of this whole debate. The president, over the past 6 years, has raised the debt limit for our country to go out and borrow money 5 times and increased the debt by over $3 trillion. $9 billion a week in Iraq. No end in sight. Borrowed more money than every president before him combined, from China, from Japan, from the OPEC countries. And now, all of a sudden, in the early days of October, he says he's going to veto a bill that provides children's health care for a few million poor kids. Now, I know when I go back to my district and I talk to constituents, they cannot believe it. And we have our friends on the other side, Mr. Speaker, telling us that this is socialism. It wasn't socialism when a Republican Congress in the 90s put this law into action, signed by President Clinton. It was a Republican Congress controlled by Newt Gingrich, a Republican Congress.
Tell the truth.
Mr. Meek. And so now all of a sudden the same program that they helped create is now all of a sudden socialism because the Democrats control the Congress. And I think it's an absolute shame, shameful, that we would have Republican members of this Congress come out here for ideological reasons to try to score some political points with their base with the blatant disregard of providing health care for all these kids. Now, you can argue all you want, but the bottom line, Mr. Murphy, is that there are millions of kids who will not get health care because the president all of a sudden found the courage. You know, we all went to school with people like this. You know, they pick on the little kids. Well, the president has this big military budget. He won't shrink that. He's got all these tax cuts that the wealthiest people in our country are getting. He won't touch that. But he's going to be a big, strong guy and come in and take it on the backs of these kids. Shameful, Mr. Speaker, shameful that he is willing to do this and that the Republican Congress, the Republican members of the House, a fringe group, enough to prevent a veto override, will help this president sustain this veto. I find it shameful that we can't take 41 days of spending in Iraq, Mr. Murphy, and help provide some health care for these kids. And I say this because we all know these kids need it. And I was watching Chris Matthews, Pat Buchanan was on, and Pat Buchanan says, I think these people need to pay for it themselves. Well, if they could pay for it themselves, we wouldn't be doing it. We would be doing something else.
Excuse me, Mr. Ryan.
Yield to my friend.
These people referring to who?
These kids.
Wow.
These families. I think, and we should get the quote, Mike, for tomorrow. We should get the quote, and we should have it out here. But these kids or these families should pay for it themselves. And they can't. And so we've got to make a decision as a country whether we're okay with that. Whether we're okay with them not having the wherewithal to pay and then no one is willing to help them. But we have made the decision in the Democratic caucus and many of our good friends on the Republican side, excluding the president in a small group of fringe members on their side, that somehow they're going to stand on principle here. They sat here for 6 years and didn't squawk one time about excessive spending. The president didn't veto one bill that came from this House, Republican-controlled, in a Republican-controlled Senate. But now all of a sudden, the American people, and I know the people in my district, see right through it, and they understand that what we're trying to do and how in the long term this will be very helpful. I yield to my friend.